Welcome to Episode 1, Managing Expectations, or as I like to call it, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The first thing I do when starting to work with a new client is to set expectations on the type of information that may be uncovered during the research process. I like to call this the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, just like that 1960s Western with Clint Eastwood, we have the good. That's the type of information that you find that is positive, that brings you pride and makes you happy. Then there is the bad. That's the type of information that maybe you have an ancestor. You were told this ancestor died in a certain way, and then you find the research and find the information, and you find that you were not told the truth. And then we have the ugly. That's the type of information that is just plain disappointing. Today, I'm going to show you examples of all three: the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have three pieces of information that you will see using three different sources. So I will show you the research process as well as the documents. So when you go down this road, please be aware that you're going to run into, or the chances are good, that you'll run into the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Let me start out with the good. That's the type of information that fills out your view, the story of your ancestor. And in this case, I am researching a man named James R. Hutton. And he was born in 1851 and died around 1940, and he lived in Chicago. So this information that I have already entered into the keyword, the date, and the location on newspapers.com is information that I have learned through my research. Okay, so as you can see, I have everything filled out. Now, one of the things that I do recommend that you do when you are doing entering in your keywords is you try different names. Okay, in this case, James R. Hutton. I've also researched him under James Hutton, and I've also researched him under Jim Hutton. Okay, but the information, most of the formal documents will probably be under his long formal name. So as you can see, I do not put a period after the initial. I've just found that sometimes that messes up the search. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's what I have found. So I'm just going to press search to try to see what information that I can find out about Mr. Hutton. As you can see, some things pop up from the Chicago Tribune. Makes sense. He lived in Chicago. And as you can see right over here, James R. The problem is, or I shouldn't say the problem, but one of the things that you will find is I don't know whether that is James R. Hutton. And in this case, it's not. It's James R. Lavelle. So I will go back. And as you can see, the different searches, a James S. Hutton, and then an R.R. Hutton. So these are the types of things that you will find when you are doing your search, is that a lot of different, in this case, Huttons pop up. Now, I get to this point, and this is where you can see, in this case, I do have a subscription to newspapers.com, and I have actually researched this man before. And as you can see, I made a clipping of the newspaper article that I found, and this is the one that I put under the category of the good. So again, I already found the clipping. As you can see, it's on my account. All I have to do is click, and the newspaper clipping pops up. This is a really cool newspaper article. The person that was researching or wanted to find out the information about Mr. James R. Hutton had no idea that his ancestor experienced something like this. So this newspaper article is from the Chicago Tribune on the 8th of June, 1935. We know the date. And 86 years old. It says his address, which matches up with the information that I have already found. For example, census records. I have found his census record that he was a salesman. And he advanced a theory yesterday as to how a wreckage of an old sailing vessel was buried at 421 East North Walter Street. It was found by workmen digging the West Side sewer. So obviously it was underground. And so Mr. Hutton filled in the information about why they would find parts of a vessel buried under the ground in downtown Chicago. And the story is, as you can see, April 1869, he arrived in Chicago from England. Another great piece of information. I did know that he was born in England, but of course, what this does is it just makes this article, I don't want to say more accurate, but now I know that it really is about or in this case, the person I was researching for, his ancestor, James R. Hutton, instead of another James R. Hutton. Okay, he came from England. It has the name of his uncle and a Mr. Corlett. They owned a vessel named the Minnie Corlett, and he was a cabin boy. Now, the research that I had pulled up before said that he did do some sailing on the Great Lakes. Okay, working on a boat. And of course, here we see an example. He worked on the Minnie Corlett. He was a cabin boy. He was returning to Chicago from Pentwater, Michigan. They had lumber and maple sugar, and they hit a terrible storm. They nearly perished in the rigging of the old ship after it struck a sandbar. They were rescued, and the vessel later was towed in, obviously, to the port in Chicago, and it sank close to the spot where the hull was found. All right, so this is my example of the good. Just an interesting story, something that the descendant did not know, the descendant of James R. Hutton. He had no idea that his ancestor had actually experienced something like this. So be prepared. That when you do go on to any kind of a website that shows newspapers, like I said, in this case, it's newspapers.com, you can do some research and find nothing. And then there have been times where I go in and I'm amazed at the kind of things that I find. Obviously, this is my example of the good.
Up next is part 2 of managing expectations using Fold 3 and a pension application.